It was a year of tumultuous change in my life. I would graduate from high school and then suddenly be whisked away halfway across the country on the premise that my grandmother was on her deathbed. Well, she wasn't. She lasted until 1999, and I had to rethink everything I had planned for college and everything else. And the music helped me get there as well. Different sounds, different feel, different everything, as my tastes continued to change as I got older, pushing closer and closer to 2 decades on the planet. The year was 1981. I'm TC Kirkham. This is Vinyl Recall. Hey VC, TC Kirkham, the Kirkham Report here. This is Vinyl Recall, the show where I go over my top 10 albums of each year in the same format that Vinyl Richie has done for the last several months, as other people have joined him on doing. This week we're up to my graduation year, 1981. I turned 18 in March, and my tastes weren't completely changing yet, but they were changing quite a bit. As you'll see from the lineup of albums here, a lot of things changed. Not everything. There's still some cheesy stuff in here, but a lot of what I picked from this were not stuff that I had on CD. Now, I have other albums on CD. One of them I just got on vinyl that I haven't played yet, and I didn't want to include it because of that. But, and I really wouldn't have included it in my top 10. It probably would have been number 11 or number 12. The other one I just have on CD, and I have quite a few good albums on CD from 1981. But at this time, we're talking vinyl, and so we're going to talk about my favorite albums from 1981 on vinyl. Now, I mentioned that we lived in Washington State, Harrington, Washington, while I was growing up, but my aunt called and convinced my mom that their mother was on her deathbed, and without any consultation with me, Mom was like, hey, we're going to move back to Ohio when you're done, when the graduation's over. And I'm like, what about all my school plans? And she's like, oh, no, never mind. You find school out there. Well, it didn't happen. I had plans to go to a broadcasting school. I was going to be a DJ. That's all I ever wanted to do. But I got uprooted, and both of my acceptances got left in the dust, and we left for Ohio in June. Now, things were changing all over the landscape in radio. When I left Spokane, AM was still the place to find top 40. In Ohio, it was already FM. AM just played farm reports and big band music and, you know, that kind of stuff. All the good FM stuff was rock and heavy metal and pop and top 40. And it would be like that for the rest of time so far. I adjusted. I got myself together and threw myself into my music, like always. God, my music got me through. My number 10 album was one of those things that started a trend in 1981. Unfortunately, the trend would last quite a while and into stuff we didn't really need, but the original was pretty good, and everybody in my class in Harrington loved it. Came out in the spring of 1981 and took off. This album is in terrible shape because it got moisture damage during our move. But it was one of the newest albums I had at the time, and I loved it, and I still do. Number 10, Stars on Long Play. This is the album version of Stars on 45. It includes the Beatles medley, which starts off with Light My Fire. What is it? Venus and I think it's Venus and something else. Intro Venus is not actually on the album version on that part of it. It's on a different part of it. It's on the more common stuff on side 2. But it does include the entire Beatles medley as well as a pop medley of disco and general pop from the 80s, 70s, and 80s. All 50s and 60s songs, which are billed to Long Tall Ernie and the Shakers on 2 different medleys. But man, you couldn't get away from the medleys for about 3 years. There was, after this, came Hooked on Classic, Pop Goes the Movies, the Beatles movie medley, the Beach Boys medley. They were all over the place, and you could not get away from them. And it was all thanks to the success of this album, which hit #1 on Billboard's album chart, as well as the single, which had the longest title because of copyright laws. Every single song had to be listed in the title on the record. 41 words. Longest title ever. Number 10, Stars on Long Play by Stars On, as they're known in Europe. Stars on 45 here in America. Number 9 took off in early 1982, and I have never understood why they only really stayed popular for 1 album. I have 3 of them. I love their music. I actually saw them. At least I think it was them. I have a memory of seeing this band when they were still known as Sail Cat Mama. My memory tells me the weekend we were at Disneyland in 1979, they were playing Tomorrow Terrace. They had a live band there. I'm sure it was Sail Cat Mama. And they will later go into this. I don't have video, and unfortunately I've never checked actually on their site or anything, but I'll keep that memory even if it's not quite accurate, because I love the band, and I always will. Number 9, Quarter Flash, the debut album from Quarter Flash. They were out of Portland, Oregon. Harden My Heart, Find Another Fool, Critical Times, Valerie, Try to Make It True, Right Kind of Love, Cruisin' with the Deuce, Love Should Be So Kind, and Williams Avenue. Produced by John Boylan, Randy Ross on lead and on saxophone, husband Marv Ross on guitars, and the band members Jack Charles, Rich Gooch, Brian David Willis, and Rick DiGianardo. They were a great band, and this came with no picture sleeve or anything. It was on Geffen Records. After the first 3 singles, they kind of slid down the chart and didn't do that well. This came out in extremely late 1981. They didn't really click on the chart till 82. And it's great. This is a Columbia House pressing, as you can see, manufactured by Columbia House under license. Never understood why they were so hot for 1 album and just disappeared, but a lot of acts were like that in the 80s. Asia was the same way. They were so much better with their first album that the second and third albums didn't do that well. Number 9 for 1981, Quarter Flash and their self-titled debut. Number 8's going to surprise people because I don't tend to lean toward hard rock. There's quite a few hard rock in here, because 1981 is when I really first started to listen to some hard rock, mainly because it crossed over to the pop chart. This guy was no exception. He would have 2 or 3 big albums, and then a video would completely deep six his career. But while this was out, sorry, I just heard something over there. While this was out, it was hot, and it played constantly on my stereo. I've always loved this album, and I always will. Number 8, Can't Say No, or Just Say, Can't Say No or Don't Say No? I always forget. Don't Say No by Billy Squier. Always get them mixed up. In the Dark, The Stroke, My Kind of Lover, You Know What I Like, 2 Days Gone, Lonely as the Night, What Do You Want From Me, Nobody Knows, I Need You, and Don't Say No. Great, old-fashioned hard rock, not quite heavy metal, but bordering on it. And the first 2 albums, of course, there's the customized Capitol label. The first 2 albums were huge. The third album, which featured Rock Me Tonight, deep sixed his career after he did a lot of dancing in that video. He wouldn't have another hit until 1990 when Tied Up came out, which was a great song too. Squire's from the Boston area. And I've always loved the guy and his guitar playing. All 3 of the singles, In the Dark, The Stroke, My Kind of Lover, all great songs. Everything on the album is good. And it was one of the, as I started to buy more metal, as I had been introduced by Def Leppard mostly the previous 2 years, and by Cheap Trick before that, I was getting into more and more of it, and Billy Squier was one I was huge into, and I still am. Number 8, Don't Say No from Billy Squier. Let me... hair flying everywhere back there. Number 7, I mentioned these guys last time, and their second album was just as good as their first, and remains a favorite to this day. And it's one of the few albums from the early 1980s that you still hear the song on the radio every weekend at the same time, because it starts the weekend. Number 7, Get Lucky from Loverboy, featuring... I've switched my camera for the Eurovision stuff, and I'm all screwing this up. Working for the Weekend, of course. When It's Over, Jump, Gangs in the Street, Emotional, Lucky Ones, It's Your Life, Watch Out, and Take Me to the Top. This is equal to their debut album, if not a little bit better. I've always been partial to When It's Over. I think that's my favorite song by them. I have loved them since the first album. Again, no special sleeve, but it is on Columbia. And Loverboy was one of the few bands out of Canada that was making a lot of big success in America at the time. We just took a Canadian music quiz, didn't do very well on it, but I knew Loverboy when it started playing, and I always will. They are great, and this album is great. I like it better than the first album, slightly. And as I said, my favorite song by them is When It's Over, and it is on this album. Number 7, Get Lucky from Loverboy. Now, number 6 was an eye-opener. I had not been a fan of this man's production work just a couple years earlier. I would discover that in the mid-90s. I was never a fan of the gentleman he was most associated with until the 90s. I'm still not a fan of most of that first album they did. But I like it enough that a couple of songs, I have it on CD and a couple of songs. But this album is a masterpiece, and it is freaking awesome. I only had it on cassette until 2 years ago when Adam, I think it was Adam at Record Crate, or maybe it was Don and Mary, had a copy, and I grabbed it, and it was completely intact, which I was ecstatic about. Number 6 for 1981, Bad for Good from Jim Steinman. This features Rory Dodd on most male vocals, and features Bad for Good, Lost Boys and Golden Girls, Love and Death of an American Guitar, Stark Raving Love, Out of the Frying Pan and Into the Fire, Surf's Up, Dance in My Pants, and Left in the Dark. And that isn't all, folks. It also comes with an additional single. This is the one from Adam. I had the single already. This has The Storm and Rock and Roll Dreams Come Through, which was the hit single off of it. And that's where I first heard him. And I was like, Jim Steinman, who is... I know that name. Of course I did. He was Meatloaf's producer, and Meatloaf did not strike me until Bat Outta Hell 2 came out. Didn't like him at all. On Cleveland International Epic Records, lyric sleeve. Jim Steinman, who we lost in 2021, was an amazing writer and producer who came up with some incredibly creative stuff. My favorite tracks on this album, in addition to the Rock and Roll Dreams Come Through single, are Surf's Up, which should have been a single, and probably Lost Boys and Golden Girls, which has also been done by Meatloaf on Bat Outta Hell 2. I was never a fan of Meatloaf until Bat Outta Hell 2, and I became a fan at that time because I heard him do Rock and Roll Dreams Come True, and I was like, what is that? And he's like, oh, this is Meatloaf. I'm like, when did he come back? Because this was 1993. Grabbed that album, and I went back and got a lot of Meatloaf's work, most of it with Jim Steinman, who I also have stuff by Celine Dion, Air Supply, Barry Manilow, and a number of other people he produced, and of course Bonnie Tyler's classic Total Eclipse of the Heart. But this is his solo album from 1981. It's number 6 on my list, Bad for Good. If you've never heard it, check it out, please. Now we're up to my top 5 from 1981, and there's a lot of rock here. I was really getting into more and more rock, particularly guitar rock. I like not so much the whole heavy metal sound with the driving bass and the driving drums, but mostly melodic guitar riffs. I was starting to gravitate to Billy Squier, Steve Clark, and Pete Willis in Def Leppard. And this guy. I have loved him from this very first album. I have everything he's done. I haven't got the newer album that came out, I think, in 2021, his first album in years. But everything else I have, and I adore him. Every single album is good. Not all of them were successful. The first one was the most successful. The second one is the best, and I'll be talking about that when it gets time, I'm sure. But this album is phenomenally good, and if you like guitar rock, there's nobody better. Number 5, Aldo Nova. The self-titled debut album includes Fantasy, Hot Love, It's Too Late, Ball and Chain, Heart to Heart, Fooling Yourself, Under the Gun, You're My Love, Can't Stop Loving You, and See the Light. The album cover is actually oriented that way because they printed it so that the stuff was at the top. It does have lyrics and printed inner sleeve and is on Portrait Records. I have loved this album from day one. Fantasy in particular. Loved the music video, which was very creative. It was like 8.5 minutes long. Cast him as either a sort of like a superhero spy. Ball and Chain is great. He does ballads really well, and people don't give him credit for that. I love Victim of a Broken Heart from his second album, Subject. This album, I play this constantly. I have it on digital also and CD. Love this guy, and I always will. Number 5, Aldo Nova and Aldo Nova. Number 4 is my favorite album by this band, and it's not the favorite album of a lot of people, even though it does have some of their best-known stuff on it. And it's too pop for the older fans of the band. Because when the band started, they were progressive rock. And they started in I think the first album came out in 74 or 75. But it was in 1977 that they added a new lead singer named Steve Perry. And they just went more toward mainstream rock from that point on. And the pinnacle of Journey's career was 1981's Escape. This is my favorite Journey album, bar none. Don't Stop Believin', Stone in Love, Who's Crying Now, Keep on Running, Still They Ride, Escape, Lay It Down, Dead or Alive, Mother, Father, and Open Arms. 3 of their biggest hits and a minor hit off this album. Who's Crying Now, I think is my favorite Journey song. I love everything they do, single-wise. I love Steve Perry's solo stuff, too. But this album is just phenomenal. Again, lyric sleeve and pictures. And on customized label there for Columbia. They first came to my attention with Wheel in the Sky in 1978. And from that point on, I had been a huge fan of Journey. And Who's Crying Now, which hit number 3, I believe, on the pop chart, is still the pinnacle. I love Don't Stop Believin', sure. Everybody knows that one. Open Arms, great ballad. Faithfully from the next album. And Separate Ways, great stuff. But nothing comes close to this album, and nothing comes close to Who's Crying Now is my favorite Journey song. Number 4 from 1981, Journey and Escape. Number 3, brought up this woman last time. She was 14 here, and doing music like you would not believe. This is my favorite album by her, of the cotillion releases. I mean, I love them all, but if I had to pick a favorite, this is it. It has 3, 4 incredible songs on it, and I'm just still in awe at this woman's voice at 14. And I know some people went and checked her out after I mentioned her last time, and I hope they'll continue to do so if you don't know her. This was the 3rd album, and it is absolutely perfect. Stacy Lattisaw, With You, number 3 on my 1981 list. Includes Feel My Love Tonight, Screaming Off the Top, It Was So Easy, Baby I Love You, Love on a Two-Way Street, With You, Young Girl, Spotlight, and my favorite song of her entire career, You Take Me to Heaven. It concludes this album. There's the back shot. And this one actually does include a picture of her with Narada Michael Walden, her producer. Lyric sleeves on Cotillion. Stacy is one of those artists that did not do a bad album. She did different albums. She definitely changed style when she got to Motown, when she got into her late teens, early 20s, and shifted to Motown Records for 2 or 3 albums. But the quality was always there. The effort was always there. Love her cover of The Moments, Love on a Two-Way Street, which was one of my favorite songs as a kid. And With You and You Take Me to Heaven, these are Whitney Houston level ballad quality. I was always surprised Whitney never tried You Take Me to Heaven, because it was perfect for her too. Oh God, what a glorious voice this girl has. Stacy Lattisaw, number 3, With You, from 1981. Number 2, we still weren't quite there yet. I like this album, although as I said when I did the influencers on them last season, I like the first album slightly better because it's more raw. This is more produced, and it's not that I have a problem with produced, and this album is phenomenally good. It's got a lot of songs that everybody knows, but I really did like the more raw sound better. Now, the third album would change that for me. This one was not as successful as the later albums, but it was more successful than the first, and that's why they headed that direction. And it was also because MTV played Bringing On the Heartbreak to no end, because it was one of the only videos they had. Number 2, High and Dry from Def Leppard. High and Dry, Saturday Night, You Got Me Running, Let It Go, Another Hit and Run, Lady Strange, On Through the Night, Mirror Mirror, No No No, Bringing On the Heartbreak, and Switch 625. Switch 625 is an amazing guitar piece from Steve Clark, and it is also included on Retroactive, an alternate take. Amazing stuff. The boys are fantastic in their prime here. They're still in their early 20s, and Rick Allen was 18 or 19. Pete Willis was 20. I think Joe was 21. Sav and Steve were 20 or 21. I mean, Let It Go, On Through the Night, Bringing On the Heartbreak, You Got Me Running. They're all pretty classics and still included in a lot of their sets. Of course, they were on Mercury Records. It does have the inner sleeve with some photos. My rabid love for Def Leppard had started with the first album, but I didn't become a true collector until Pyromania came out in '83, and we'll get to that in the near future. But this album, very good, and no real clunkers on it, and the first major production from Mutt Lange. He's what turned them into who they are, and Mutt Lange became instrumental to their sound. Eventually he would just be kind of executive producer, and the boys were producing themselves, and they were doing a great job. But this album brought them together in ways that nobody thought they could be, and they were better than they'd ever been and deserved to be. Def Leppard, High and Dry, number 2. Number 1, one of my all-time favorite bands, and one of the ones I did not see in concert, have not seen in concert. And this is still not my favorite album by them. That would come up later. But this is damn close. And one of their other albums made my top 10s as well. This hit right when we moved to Ohio. The single hit the radio the week after we moved into Ohio, and the album came out a month later. And it became a soundtrack for me for the next year. It would produce 4 hit singles, and 2 of which are my favorite, my all-time favorites by them. And to me, this band could do no wrong, because you have amazing players, amazing vocals. They all work together to put together the most amazing sound. And this album became their biggest hit album ever, if I'm not mistaken. It might be, the other one might be, the one I'm thinking of for later, might be bigger, but it didn't hit as high. This hit #1 on Billboard's album chart, I'm pretty sure. If it didn't, it was like 2 or 3. And it's a great album from start to finish. And everything on it is perfect for them. It's their perfect sound. #1 for 1981, 4 by Foreigner. Nightlife, Jukebox Hero, Break It Up, Waiting for a Girl Like You, Luann, Urgent, I'm Gonna Win, Woman in Black, Girl on the Moon, and Don't Let Go. Urgent and Waiting for a Girl Like You are 2 of my favorite Foreigner songs of all time. Waiting for a Girl Like You is my favorite ballad. That song spent a whopping 10 weeks at #2 without ever managing to hit #1. First Physical and then Private Eyes kept it out of #1, or I Can't Go For That, one of the 2 of those by Hall & Oates. They left over the top of it. That was a crime. Lou Gramm is one of my favorite vocalists of all time. I love his work with Foreigner. I loved his solo albums from the late 80s and early 90s. And Urgent and Waiting for a Girl Like You, and to a lesser extent Jukebox Hero, which I also really love because it gets into the really heavy stuff that they do, are perfect Foreigner tracks for radio. Jukebox Hero got more airplay on AOR than it did on Top 40, but the other 2 were huge Top 40 hits as well. And deservedly so. The rest of the album, all the album tracks, fantastic. Break It Up was also a single. Foreigner is a band that I don't think has ever done wrong by me. Double Vision, without a question, was the best of the early stuff. And Head Games I liked, but not as much as I liked Double Vision. And then Foreigner came along and blew it. 4 came along and blew Head Games out of the water. Although I liked that title track a lot. This is just an absolutely stupendous album. And if you like Foreigner, you already know that, don't you? #1 for 1981 on my list, Foreigner's 4. So, recapping my top 10 for 1981, they are Stars on Long Play by Stars on 45, Quarter Flash by Quarter Flash, Don't Say No by Billy Squier, Get Lucky by Loverboy, Jim Steinman's Bad for Good, Aldo Nova's self-titled debut album, Escape by Journey, With You by Stacey Lattisaw, High and Dry by Def Leppard, and 4 by Foreigner. 1981 was a good year. 1982 and 1983 would get even better as the new British invasion started and really just grabbed a hold of my sensibilities. The synth pop, disco-y synth pop sound I was into all the way. I was still into Teen Idol, still into pop, still into, pop metal, Foreigner, Def Leppard. But the synth pop that would start emerging in 1982, it was phenomenally good. And all of these albums would rank probably alongside those of 82 and 83 as some of the best music of the 80s. And we will get into those in the next 2 shows. But I think I'm changing. You go back and look at my 1975 and 1978 and then look at 1981. You can see the difference in music that I'm talking about. 1982 is next week, and I have a feeling it's going to be interesting to see. I'm trying to see what's on. Let me check what's on. I've already done all these up through 1990 as best I can. And I haven't finished this one yet because I haven't decided the last 3, but and some of these I only have on CD. But there's a lot of good stuff on here, and it'll be fun to show it off. So that's 1981, 1982 to come. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and if you have done so, thank you. I really appreciate it. I'd appreciate if you'd share what you're watching, if you like it, and please leave a comment. I love talking to you about this. I get a lot of comments on Vinyl Recall because everybody else is finding stuff they don't hear. And Carlson's always like, I don't know what that is. I never heard of any of those. Yeah, well, I feel the same way about all the African music you love, Steve. It sounds great, but I don't know any of it until you play it. So that's why I watch, one of the reasons I watch your show. 1982 coming up next week, right here on Vinyl Recall. I'm TC Kirkham, the Kirkham Report. Ciao, baby.